In this episode, we will be talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill.
If anybody thinks this is not going to strongly affect, especially the disabled, then they really weren't paying attention. Is there things going on that need to be addressed? Absolutely. But taking a broad stroke like this injures a lot of people who are already injured.
So, in recent weeks, we saw a brand new migrant detention center named Alligator Alcatraz pop up in record time.
How did they get it done so fast? When we have worked and worked and worked to get things just pushed through the local governments for years.
We need to address what the problem was to begin with, and we aren't doing that. We're just locking people up, and that's very, very expensive to do.
Let's talk about the process you've been going through to get your transitional housing up and running in Brevard.
We've been trying to get that up and running for over 2 years now.
And we're just now going through the permitting processes. And then you look at what's happened with the Alligator Alcatraz or whatever, and you're sitting there going, you got that done in 2 weeks? How in the world can politicians, when they have an agenda, can get something done literally overnight? But we can't address something that has been growing in our society since we were born as a country, coming up on 250 years ago.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Lewis from Imagine Marketing. I'm joined by Pastor Scott, who is the founder and CEO of Matthew's Hope, as well as Shelley Bradford, who is the president and executive director of Matthew's Hope. Welcome to this week's episode of Straight Talk, No BS with Matthew's Hope, presented by Imagine Marketing. At Imagine Marketing, we put in the extra effort to craft a tailored strategy for success. We also offer photography, videography, and even podcast production services. So book your free consultation with us today. In this episode, we will be talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill, Alligator Alcatraz, and how they relate to our nation's homeless crisis. So, Scott, there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks related to the One Big Beautiful Bill and how it will impact Medicare and Medicaid benefits. How do you think the bill will impact your guests?
Well, before I get into answering a lot, I need to make it clear because I know I'm going to get some notes on this. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I'm an independent. I don't like any of them. Everybody get that? And the reason I say that is it's less about liking anybody. I don't know these people personally. How could I possibly like or dislike him? You know, when I sit there and say, I hate him, I don't know him. May say some dumb shit, but I don't know him. Okay. You know, but that said, this is more about policies. When we talk on our podcast, it's about policies, and I don't really care who's setting them. I have to look at how that's going to affect the population we serve and what have you. So we'll touch on a couple things. As far as this big, beautiful bill, I don't even know if I've ever heard of a president naming their bill something before. So I don't know what that's all about. But anyhow, I'm not a chest puffer, so I don't need to do that either. But this bill that's come out, to suggest for a minute, if anybody who has spent any time researching it, not by what somebody else has told you,
Right.
or what, look, here's the bottom line. We had people vote on this thing that admitted they didn't even read it. How in the hell did we even give you a vote you in if you're not going to take the time? Now, I realize that a lot of these folks, they don't read them. They have aides that read them and then dumbs it down for them. Okay. At the same time, I've taken time to look through some of this. And if anybody thinks this is not going to strongly affect, especially the disabled, then they really weren't paying attention. And one of our fastest growing populations are the disabled, physically and mentally disabled. And it's usually due to the fact that they've outlived their caregiver. So the Medicaid or the Medicare, depending on what the situation was a piece of what took care of them. It's not enough money to take care of all these things. Also, it's not like these people are getting a check. What they're getting is care that someone in the medical field has said they need. Okay. So let's get that clear too. People are not just getting a Medicare or a Medicaid check. That's not going to happen. They're getting care that someone says they needed. Shelley's been through some of this with her own personal family. We've talked about it in past episodes. She has a son who was born with Down syndrome. She has another son who was born with a form of autism that she can touch on. And then when her parents passed away, she inherited her 46-year-old brother, who is deaf, going blind, and mentally slow.
He has the mind of a 12-year-old.
Mind of a 12-year-old, okay? And he's 46. He's not going to care for himself. So I'll let her touch on that. If you just want to tell a little bit about your own family,
Yeah.
and then I'll touch on, I'll go further on where I'm going.
Yeah, we've touched on my brother. He's really he's like living with a 12-year-old. You know, he makes adult decisions sometimes, but you always have to really be there with him and help, you know, direct him, because he really doesn't know the implications of the decisions that he's making a lot of times. And then I have a son with Asperger's, which is a form of autism. He's high functioning. He works. He has a job, goes to school,
He
but
actually works for us.
he does. He works for us. Has a car payment. He's very responsible, but along with autism, a lot of times comes high anxiety. And so I've had to learn how to navigate that. And I'm not the most patient person, believe it or not. I know I look really nice and angelic sometimes. So I've had to really learn how to navigate, how to be patient with Meyer. And then Thomas was a surprise to all of us. He was born with Down syndrome. I did all the tests. I was supposed to have a perfect little baby, and he's absolutely perfect. But he was supposed to have no issues. I was supposed to have a 1 in 35,000 chance of having a child with special needs, because in New York, I had my children after 30, and that's considered high risk in New York. Nowhere else in the country, but in New York, it's considered high risk. So we did all the tests. And and we had Thomas, and I mean, Thomas will always live with us. And Jacob will live with us until he can't, right? Thomas and Meyer are very blessed. They actually have a trust that's going to take care of them past their parents. My brother didn't have that. And so when me and my husband, are no longer able to care with him, we're going to have another family member care for him, as long as he lives.
Yes.
And if I hadn't taken my brother in, or another family member hadn't been able to take him in, he would be in the same situation as our guests. And I think about that all the time, and I think he's not tough like our guests. Would he have become tough like our guests? I don't know. My mom was a very gentle person. And so he wasn't around a lot of toughness. My dad was tough. My dad was he was a Navy man. He was tough, but my mom softened that a lot. So I just think about Jacob a lot when I see our guests, especially when I see deaf guests.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had a new deaf guest yesterday, and just to watch him, he was so innocent. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I looked at him and I thought, in a month, are you still going to be gentle?
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can't get you off the street, are you still going to be gentle?
Right. So
It's and before we go on, I want to touch on this too, because Shelley said something that I don't know if everybody caught. She said, until he can't. In other words, until he can no longer stay with them. That may be another family, but here's where all the Medicaid and Medicare stuff comes in.
Right.
Is that there's going to be a point where she's not going to be able to care for him.
Mhm.
There could become a point where she can't care for Thomas.
Sure.
Children born with Down syndromes typically didn't make it past their 30s.
Yeah.
Now they're living to be 50, 60, 70 years old. That's unheard of. And so at some point, there were systems put into place to actually help come along with that and be able to assist with that care financially, because it's not cheap. And you're seeing in this big, beautiful bill, we're seeing a lot of that wiped out. Is there things going on that need to be addressed? Absolutely. Is there fraud? Absolutely. But taking a broad stroke like this injures a lot of people who are already injured. And I just wish there was more thought given to it, as opposed to just let's do this thing.
Right.
And then do that all and still end up with adding $3 or $4 trillion to our deficit. I'm not getting that at all.
And this is just not. I follow friends from all walks of life, and I have a lot of people that are very strong supporters of our president, and I have a lot of people that are in my life currently that are very much not supporters of him, and I follow them both. And they both are all like, especially the Trump supporters, we did not vote for this. And it's so interesting to watch now because they were such strong Trump supporters.
Well, it's also it's interesting to watch people that have been damaged now by the very person they voted for.
Correct.
But again,
And it's
that's
interesting.
not new.
Yeah.
That's not new because that's happened
Mhm.
in the Biden administration.
Mhm.
It took place in the Obama administration. It took place in the Clinton administration, the Reagan administration, the Bush administration. Every one of those, this type of thing has happened. This is just
like a deeper
it's
cut.
It's a deeper cut. It's a deeper wound, and it's a deeper wound on people that, like I said, were already wounded, already wounded. So that is my big concern about what that's going to look like.
Mhm. So you mentioned broad strokes, and one thing that we've heard from politicians recently is the idea of the 35-year-old able-bodied person living in their parents' basement will finally have to get a job. Do your guests simply not want to work?
Look. There's an exception to the rule all the time. Are there lazy people? Yes. Are there people that take advantage of the system? Yes. No one's denying that. But as a broader stroke, in a more true stroke, if they did their research, is a couple of things. One is what often looks able-bodied
Is not right.
isn't. We've discovered this with several of our guests that Donnie, we talked about him in the past. When I first met Donnie, I went, why is this guy homeless? He is well put together for someone living on the streets. He's well spoken, clearly educated. And it took a couple of months, and all of a sudden his mental illness started to show itself. So, that whole thing, judging a book by its cover, you got to stop that. That's foolish. That's ignorant. In some cases, stupid. Okay. You just got to stop. Okay. You don't know what's going on. And unfortunately, so you have that aspect of it. You have people that physically look like they can. And some of them could with the right supervision and guidelines
as well.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Then you also have this playing into it. Okay. I have my 26-year-old stepdaughter, soon to be 26-year-old stepdaughter living with us. And she makes a pretty good living. However, what's happened is I understand this has happened throughout the country, but particularly in Florida, what I know has happened is that we are now requiring people to have 3 times the income of whatever their rent is. So if you have a $2,000 rent, which is common here in Florida for a 1-bedroom apartment, then you have to show a $72,000 income. And that can't include overtime. That's just what you make in a regular 40-hour week.
Yeah.
Okay. My 29-year-old stepson is living with 3 other men. He is a manager at a well-known restaurant chain, makes a decent living, but he can't qualify because a lot of his income is based on overtime. Okay. So he's with 3-4 other guys that are educated people, have decent jobs, and I think there's 4 of them now living in a house because none of them can qualify by themselves. Okay. And a lot of the general public doesn't understand that because that wasn't true when they grew up. So they're living in mom's basement often. That used to be a joke, living in the basement. Okay.
Right.
What's wrong with this guy? It's no longer a joke. Now it's become a necessity in many cases that these people have to be supplemented. And I'm not saying supplement them by the government. If anybody knows me, I'm way too conservative for that. But it also means we need to take a step back and look at reality. If you can pay the rent, you can pay the rent. If you can't, you can't. Okay. So, and a lot of that was brought on during the pandemic when suddenly we weren't making property owners, we weren't making renters pay their rent. We didn't say, hey, can you or can you not? We just said, you know what? Yeah, you can fall out. So what happens is most property is actually owned by moms and pops. They own a number of houses or a small 20 building, 1 building, 20 unit complex. And all of a sudden nobody paid their rent and they still had to pay their mortgage. So if they survived the pandemic, the next thing that happened was we don't want to manage this anymore. And they gave it over to property managers who made this requirement. So there's a lot more than what people see visually or what they understand, but they aren't asking the questions.
That's why we always say peel back that onion.
Yeah.
And not just on our guests, just in general. I mean, there's story after story after story we can tell you, just like Scott just said. My niece is the same. She's living with her mom. She's not living off of her mom. She is on that lease with her mom. And they could not have lived in this house if they did not both have that income.
Wow.
It's just, but people, luckily, people like my niece and like your kids have changed their way of thinking. We got to catch up.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think what she just said, her mom couldn't qualify by herself. The daughter couldn't qualify by herself. I mean, is that crazy? So we're not talking about a kid. We're not talking about a young adult with a more mature, for lack of a better way of saying, adult that between them had to come together to qualify to have a place to live.
And other countries have lived this way for years.
Right. Well, then the other thing we run into
generational living.
And again, I assume this is national. I can't say for sure, but I can tell you in the state of Florida, there's laws that limit the number of people that can live in a house.
Yeah.
There's also laws that understand this, DCF laws that require that a child have a bedroom that they can lock from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you can't just, even with our transitional housing, we can't just bring people in and say, okay, we're going to, just to keep you safe, we're going to put you into this room. No, that child has to have a room of their own. So, there's so much more to this unless somebody's willing to educate them. They're really talking out of their backsides. I call them ventriloquist. Okay. You're talking out of your ass. Stop it. Okay. Educate yourself, understand what's going on before you go on there and blast everybody on social media with what you think you know.
Right. So going back to Medicare and Medicaid, isn't it true that some of your guests could in fact work if they get treatment for basic mental health or other medical issues?
Of course. And they do.
Yeah.
But again, often the Medicaid, Medicare is what is making it possible to get the medications.
Correct.
But here's the next thing we do is then we penalize people when they go back to work. So it's kind of like you go back, you get work, and now we're going to take food stamps away from you. You go to work, we're taking medical benefits away from you, or we're cutting things back. So this is creating more homelessness or making it harder to get out of homelessness. And people need to understand that.
Yeah.
There's so much more to this than people understand. But quite honestly, people are willing to jump on a bandwagon and not bother to ask the question. And it's unfortunate. It is what it is. And we deal with it. But we encourage people. Again, if you have a different view on this and you can back that up with statistics and truth, we're going to invite you on here. I used to tell my children,
help us see it differently.
Help us see it differently. I actually told my children this, and I probably have said this in the past. When they were growing up, I said, I'm not going to tell you what to believe politically or theologically.
Yep.
But I want you to be able to know why you believe it and then be able to articulate it.
Yep.
And what I find is those making the most noise at times cannot articulate why they believe that.
Right.
Me saying, I don't believe it because I don't, that just isn't an answer. Okay. Whether it's a politician saying that, which I'm stunned how often politicians say that. Well, I just know. Well, how the hell do you know? Come on, give me a break. Just stop it. Okay. No, you have an agenda and you want to push it. Okay. We as people need to sit there and educate ourselves and go, well, who is doing this and who's taking advantage of it, and show me how, anyhow, I'm passionate about this.
Very much so.
Because I'm seeing what it's creating. And the thing is, funding is down. State of Florida, the entire budget for to address homelessness is $35 million. Mm-hmm. Our budget for the 17 municipalities we serve is $15 million. The math doesn't work. How are you going to fix this?
Right. So in recent weeks, we saw a brand new migrant detention center named Alligator Alcatraz pop up in record time. Some people have commented on social media things like, imagine what they could do for our homeless population if they were this motivated. What are your thoughts on that?
You want to say anything before I blast off?
I've even heard that said, because I am in the disability world, I've even heard that said how that money could have helped our children. That meant how much farther could that have helped our children in work programs and things like that. It is really, how did they get it done so fast when when we have worked and worked and worked to get things just pushed through the local government for years, and this popped up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it just shows that if a politician is motivated based on their agenda, not necessarily the will of the people,
Right.
their agenda, they can get anything done, and that is very unfortunate. Look, I'm not going to get into whether I think it's goofy again that we give these silly names to Big Beautiful Bill and what's it called again?
Alligator
Alligator Alcatraz. I mean, it's so childish in my opinion. And go ahead and send me a nastygram. I'm gonna throw it away because that's just goofy. But as such, with what it is, you look at that, you go through motivation of your agenda. Again, not necessarily will of people, because a lot of people go on, well, wait a minute, there's environmental concerns.
Right.
These are human beings. There's that concern. A lot of people think, well, you're no longer human if you came from a different country or you broke a law coming in here. Look, I'm not for just opening up our borders, never have been. And to suggest anybody thinks that's right, most of us don't ever think that. We often find people, they're referring to these folks illegal aliens. Personally, I just call them undocumented. And I can show you in 15 years, I don't believe we've ever had, I don't ever recall ever having someone who is undocumented. So they're not taking advantage of our system or anybody else's system from what we can tell. The next thing is I would tell you is that, we were told that we're going to round up bad people, criminals and what have you. And the people that were eating dogs and cats is, does anybody really believe for a second that people were, I mean, anyhow, I guess some people did believe that. But you know what? If there's people eating your dogs, you should have them arrested because I think that's awful. You eat my cats, we're going to have a problem. Okay, forget about the government. But our educated people at the top, our leaders suggested and they said they had proof that people were eating dogs and cats in Springfield. So let's go after the bad people. But what a lot of folks fail to remember too is, and most of these folks were paying taxes. They weren't getting paid under the table. Okay. They were paying taxes. And so Florida will suffer from this also. I mean, I've got developer friends right now that can't find a drywall hanger. They can't find a framer. They can't find different things. And not just because those that were undocumented have left or are locked up right now, but other people that have been here with the right papers, with the right information, doing everything correctly, have just chosen to leave because they don't want to be in a country like this. And I think when it gets right down to it, we're going to be very sorry for two reasons. Number one is we need to address what the problem was to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we aren't doing that. We're just locking people up. And that's very, very expensive to do. So now you've eliminated the taxes they were paying. Now we're paying to have them locked up. And believe me, it's not cheap. I think people would be stunned. I know in the state of Florida, studies have been done, and it says that it's going to cost between $45,000 and $55,000 per person to incarcerate somebody. I assure you, when the dollars come in and the numbers come in and what's going on in Alligator Alley, those numbers are going to be much higher. Then you put in the human aspect of it. There's so much that's wrong with it. But let's put all that aside for a second. Let's come right back down to what the real issue is. The real issue is how in the world can politicians, when they have an agenda, can get something done literally overnight, but we can't address something that has been growing in our society since we were born as a country, coming up on 250 years ago.
It's not their priority.
We just keep kicking this down the curb, and all of a sudden but we don't want to look like this or like that.
Mm.
It's awful. It needs to change. And if we can get things done like that, then let's get it changed.
Yeah.
So change.
Let's talk about the process you've been going through to get your transitional housing up and running in Brevard compared to how quickly that was approved and built.
Well, isn't that just a nice way to say that? We've been trying to get that up and running for over 2 years now.
Yeah. Our first meetings with the powers that be happened almost 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. And we're just now going through the permitting processes. Uh, we've lost grant money that we had that we could have had to build this.
Because it
We've
took
lost.
so long.
Oh, it has been expensive loss to us. It has been a long, drawn out process. Every time we've gotten to the finish line has moved.
Mhm.
But again, you look at that, and we could have been housing. Most of our transitional housing, quite honestly, is been used over the years with single moms and children. But we could have been housing people, getting them on their feet. Instead, what's happened is we've spent a lot of unnecessary dollars. We have lost a lot of dollars that we're going to pay for it that we need to go find money, now more money. But again, you look at that, and then you look at what's happened with the Alligator Alcatraz or whatever, and you're sitting there going, you got that done in 2 weeks.
Right.
We can do better as a people. And if we can't elect people that can do the will of the people, then something's wrong with us. Okay. And let's talk about these landslides. There was nobody who's won anything by a landslide. Actually, 37% of the general public didn't even bother voting in the last election.
Yeah.
And neither party got that many. I think it was 37, 35, and 32 or something like that. So this mandate that we're talking about, again, I don't care if you're a Trumpster or you're a lib. It really doesn't care. None of that makes any sense when you really look at it. Let's call it for what it is.
So do you guys have anything else to add in regards to the potential impacts of the big, beautiful bill at this point before we close up?
Well, I think the time will tell what the fallout's going to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. I personally,
There's things that are in it deep that the people who voted on it that did not read it, as we discussed earlier, that can really change the way that our society is run. And that's really, if it goes through that way, that could be detrimental to America as we know it.
as we know, and I don't think that's too extreme. And I was watching one of the, I believe it was the congressman out of Alaska. And,
Oh yeah.
she
I
was
saw that.
vehemently against this and made it clear she was. But then she negotiated a little part of it that would make it better for Alaskans and still voted for it. I think there's sometimes when you just got to step back and go, no, if it's wrong for one American, it's wrong
Right.
for all
Correct.
Americans.
Correct.
Okay. Otherwise, why do we have the United States of America? Why don't we just break it back up again and let everybody do their own thing? Which sometimes I wonder, based on how some of these governors and senators and congressmen are thinking, that maybe what they're trying to drive towards. I don't know. I think the way they talk about each other sometimes. Look, I'm not a big fan of the governor out Newsom out in California. I'm not. I'm not a big fan. But you know what? To sit there and just call him names and talk about what a horrible human being he is and all that kind of thing. Again, that's childish.
Probably not.
I'm 63 years old. I don't got to sit here and call people names.
Right.
What I say is I disagree and I think it can be done better. Go on and then go prove that you can do it better.
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
Well, thank you both for all the insight and your thoughts on the topic.
I'll be
It's a
back
hot
in
topic.
counseling and doubling up on my medications now.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this all plays out. And thank you to everyone watching and listening. Please like, share, subscribe with all of your friends. See you next episode.